Welcome back to GCC Kids Connection, where we are connecting with each other while you're home from school. We're connecting with some really cool books, and most importantly, we're connecting with God's Word. We're so glad you're here.
Hi kids, welcome back. Let's see what we can find out about Fuzzle today. Our poor friend Fuzzle has been lost in the woods for several nights now, still hasn't found his way back to his mom, learned some really hard lessons about frogs, and is kind of thinking maybe he's going to have to make his bed a little bit more comfortable. But his biggest problem right now is loneliness. Well, let's find out and see what happens with Fuzzle in chapters 7 and 8. I had resigned myself to being a loner. It was plain to me that no one in the forest wished to make friends with me. Although I couldn't understand it, I guess that's just the way it was, and I would have to accept that I was going to have to carry on alone. I rose a bit early the next night because I was determined to make my bed more comfortable. I busied myself carrying leaves and moss and tried to arrange them in the fashion that Mother had. I never could get it quite right, but at least it was some improvement. After I was satisfied that I had done all I could do, I set out to the pond again. I drank my fill and then was subjected to the splashes of frogs as they seemed to tease me from the safety of the other side of the pond. I licked my chops thinking of what a delicious meal they would make. They must have felt that they knew me and knew also that I was really no threat to their safety, for they hardly waited until I finished my drink before they began to croak again. Some of them were very near to me, and I felt an anger rise up within me. But instead of moving on, I stood motionless. As difficult as it was, I waited patiently until a croaking frog swam very close to me. With all the energy I could muster, I sprang right at him. There was a big splash as I hit the water. The frog splash followed it close behind, by many other splashes all around the pond. I crawled back out, shook my wet coat, and then headed down the path to see if I could find the berry patch. Perhaps there would be a few more berries on the bushes. The berry picking was slim. I only found a few, and what I did find were small and green. They were not very good eating. I did find some crickets and a few other bugs. I was feeling dejected when I remembered the leftovers from the lunch that I had found a few nights ago. I didn't suppose that there'd be any chance that I could be lucky twice, but it wouldn't hurt to check it out. So I headed for the spot. Well, to my delight, I found that there had been another picnic. In fact, maybe several picnics. I also found that there were other animals who had decided to take advantage of the fact. 2 coons were scraping over a large barrel that seemed to be filled with goodies. A possum was enjoying himself in a smaller barrel close by to me. I watched in silence, knowing that they weren't very likely to share. They were still busy engaged when a large bear, followed closely by 2 bear cubs, came around to the picnic table. The coons did not even fight for their rights. At one grunt from the big bear, they scurried out of the barrel without a fuss. The possum, too, disappeared. It seemed that there would be more than enough food for the bear and her cubs and everyone else. I didn't understand why they had to leave. I didn't intend to cut in on her diggings and rooting in the large barrel, but I did think that I could check out the smaller one. I approached very quietly, not wanting to disturb her and her quarreling cubs. I was almost to the small barrel when her head swung around and her nose began sniffing busily in the wind. With one alarmed woof, she swung away from the barrel and was gone, and her 2 cubs scurried along in an effort to keep up with her. I don't know what it was that made her decide to leave. I guess she just didn't want to be around me. I did hope that I hadn't offended her in any way, and then I just decided to forget all about her and to go about the work of finding my meal. In her haste to rush off, she had tipped the big barrel over on its side, which was a big help to me. I could walk right in and thoroughly go through the contents. My, there were a lot of good things in there. I couldn't believe my find. I tasted things that night that I had never tasted before. By the time I decided to head back to my log, my tummy was bulging. My feet dragged, my eyes felt so heavy. If there is anything that makes one feel sleepy, it's a full tummy, and I could hardly wait to reach my bed. The log looked so inviting when I finally reached it. I pushed my way in. At the narrow door, my tummy rubbed against the sides. I was so full. I reached my bed and flopped down. The soft leaves and moss were a real improvement in the comfort of my bed, even if they weren't quite arranged just right. Eventually, I would get them worked out the way I wanted them. I tried to curl up, but my full tummy prevented me from becoming much of a ball. Instead, I just tucked my feet in a bit and snuggled down with my head lying on a pile of leaves. Contentedly, I sighed, then grinned into the darkness. How nice it was to have a full pond and barrels full of picnic leftovers so close by. And how nice it was of that big mama bear and her 2 cubs to leave so willingly. I slept all day, hardly stirring or shifting position in my sleep. When I awoke, I was surprised to find that I actually felt a little bit hungry again. I yawned and stretched and worked the sleep kinks from my muscles. My soft bed felt so good that for a minute I was tempted to just turn over and go right back to sleep. Instead, I stirred myself, knowing that if I did not go out for breakfast, I would be feeling starved before another moon rose to cover the earth with its light. When I pushed my nose out of the log entrance, I found a cool and pleasant evening beckoning me. I moved forward cautiously. Mama's training, in fact, the very first lesson, had taught us to advance only after having carefully tested to determine that no danger lay on the pathway. Feeling my confidence grow as I moved down the path, I hurried my footsteps toward the pool. In fact, I even broke into a rather lopsided lope, my tail pluming out behind me. The pool was a busy place. Across the way, I could see a raccoon washing his breakfast before eating. A fish jumped, sending out ripples that were caught in the light of the moon. The frogs farthest away from the action were giving an occasional croak and splashing here and there. I paused to drink, enjoying the coolness of the water as it trickled down my throat. I liked the pool, and yet I was quite willing to share it with the other creatures of the forest. I was turning my head for the picnic area when I noticed a pair of eyes studying me. They belonged to a large bullfrog. Another frog nearby croaked out a warning, and I caught the conversation between them. "Don't you think you should take cover?" asked the smaller frog, to which the big frog replied, "Nah, it's just that dumb skunk kid. He'll starve to death before he makes a hunter. All we need to do is just sit for a moment and he'll get tired and leave." I turned my back on them, but it did bother me some. Well, let them croak, I don't care. I could get a good breakfast from the picnic barrels. I was leaving in a bit of a huff when I noticed that the coon had moved around to my side of the pond. Remembering how angry he had become with me when I had frightened away his breakfast before, I stopped right where I was, making not a breath of sound or a quiver of movement. I watched him. He, too, was motionless and silent. He stood poised until I thought that surely he must have frozen to the spot. The frogs soon resumed their song, seeming to pick up the tune right where they left off. There was an occasional splashing or diving of frogs visiting and lurching and just exercising a bit. Suddenly, the coon moved. One silent, quick movement. And when his paw came up out of the water, it held a frog for his breakfast. Even the frogs nearby scarcely saw the movement or heard the sound. Only a few even stopped singing, and those who didn't even bother to splash back into the depths of the pond. So that's how it's done. I filed the information in the back of my mind just in case I would ever need it. For a time, I would still enjoy the tasty treats of the barrels, and so I headed in that direction. I don't believe that the coon had even spotted me. At least, I did not hear him snarl angrily in my direction. I decided to practice moving very quietly through the woods. I must have practiced well, for I was almost on the very tails of two bush bunnies before they noticed me. I was all set to stop for a visit, and they darted off into the underbrush. A big sigh escaped me. Would I ever be able to make a friend in this neighborhood? The barrels were already occupied. Two possums were arguing over the contents of one of them. I couldn't understand for the life of me why they should be fighting. There was plenty for everyone. I moved over to the second barrel to ask an overweight raccoon if he minded sharing with me. He left me the whole thing and went off into the woods muttering to himself. I had decided not to let it bother me and went right on to the work of my first course. The food was plentiful and tasty, and I soon was filled. It was early, and I didn't like going back to my log so soon. I wasn't sleepy, so I decided to go for a walk instead. I headed off in a direction that I had never taken before. The path was well worn, so I felt fairly certain that there would be another number of woodland creatures around this area. Sure enough, I had not gone far when I met some bush rabbits. They did not stay to talk or play, so I continued on down the path. I saw a mother coon who was busy scolding her offspring. One of the bold little fellows answered her back and got a sharp slap for his brashness. I thought that it wasn't very likely that either of them would be in the mood for a neighborly chat, so I went on my way. After going some distance, I came upon a meadow. It was lovely in the moonlight. The slight breeze stirred the fragrant flowers, making them wave and dance in unison. Here and there crickets chirped and small night creatures stirred in the grasses underfoot. A large owl swooped through the neighboring branches and then rested on a limb, filling the night with a strange kind of cry. Another owl answered back from somewhere in the distance. I couldn't help but wish that my log were here in this meadow. It was alive with woodland folk. Very near to me there was a stirring, and I turned my head. There, only a few feet away, stood a fawn, daintily nibbling on some delicate grasses. I held my breath, watching her. She was quite the most beautiful creature and graceful thing I had ever seen. I stood quietly because I did not want her to run away. Suddenly, she lifted her head and looked at me. I did not speak or move, though I wanted with all my heart to do so. Then the most amazing thing happened. She smiled. "Hello," she said shyly. "Hello?" I echoed, hardly above a whisper. "Are you new here?" I nodded my head in assent. "Do you live in the meadow?" I found my tongue then. No, I live that way in a log house." I was just going to ask her where she lived when her mother moved into view. She stopped short and looked at me, then at her baby, and then back at me. She was slim and graceful as she stood statue-like in the moonlight, but the look on her face was one of concern, not pleasure. "Come, dear," she said rather sharply. Though I wanted to protest, the young fawn did not for a moment question her mother. The two of them then quickly left me, and I could hear them leaving through the meadow. I decided to leave then too. All of the joy was gone out of my venture. I took my full tummy and headed for my log. It was some distance back, and I knew that by the time I reached it, I would be sleepy and ready for bed. Even as I trudged along, I had visions of the young fawn. It would be so nice to have her as a friend. Maybe if I visited the meadow, I would see her again. I decided to get to the business of eating over quickly the next night, so I'd have plenty of time to spend at the meadow. This is looking exciting. I wonder if Fuzzle's finally going to have a friend. Well, we'll have to come back next time and find out. just want to take a look at your activity sheet for today. You can go just click on see more on the website, and you can find the drop box with our activity sheets. Again, there are some really good thinking questions at the top, and then some advice for Fuzzle. Fuzzle really wants a friend. What Bible verses about friendship could you share with Fuzzle? And then down here at the bottom, if you remember, Fuzzle talked about a raccoon washing his food before he ate it. So, something to look up. Do raccoons really wash their food before they eat it? Or what's that all about? See if you can find out. Well, hope to see you back here tomorrow when we find out if Fuzzle gets to see his new friend again. So see you next time.